Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll be starting in a minute or so. We're just letting people arrive into the webinar. We'll be with you shortly. I can see lots of people coming in. All right. I think we might get started. So hello and welcome, everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands from which we're all respectively meeting and pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging. We also extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and to all Indigenous peoples across the region. We recognise the enduring connection of First Nations people to the lands, water and culture, a connection that continues unbroken through time. I would personally like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the lands from which I'm speaking to you today. So welcome everyone to the second session of the 2025 ACTS and SDSN Australia, New Zealand and Pacific Regional Forum on Putting Education for the SDGs into Practice in Higher Education. I'm Tal Keston, Network Manager of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, or SDSN, for Australia, New Zealand and Pacific, based at the Monash Sustainable Development Institute. And I'm absolutely delighted to be co-hosting this series with the wonderful Rhiannon Boyd, CEO of ACTS, as part of a long-standing collaboration to support the higher education sector to embed the SDGs in strategy, curriculum and practice. The aim of the forum overall is to specifically look at SDG 4.7, which calls for all learners to acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development and what it means for practice for higher education. In the first session of this forum, a couple of days ago, we heard from several amazing sustainability leaders on priorities and pathways higher education institutions could take to implement SDG 4.7. In today's session, we'll focus on another key aspect of this puzzle, which is what are the workforce knowledge and skills that are needed to promote sustainable development, and what is the role of higher education in providing these? It's a big and very current topic of discussion, and we have some great speakers and leaders, both from within and importantly from outside academia, to help guide us through it. To lead the discussion, I'm delighted to introduce our moderator and expert, Professor Usha Iraniga. Usha is Professor of Sustainable Built Environment at the School of Property, Construction and Project Management at RMIT University. And she is the Circular Built Environment Working Group. She's the co-lead of the Circular Built Environment Working Group hosted by UNEP and is the chair of the Circular Economy Research Network Asia Pacific, as well as an ACTS director. But before I pass on to her, I'll mention that there will be time for questions towards the end of the session, and we would love to hear from you. To ask a question, please use the Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It has a question mark and Q&A written underneath. So now I'd like to pass you on to Usha to get us started.
Thanks, Tal, and I hope you can hear me okay. Can you? Yeah, great. So I'm also speaking from the lens of the Kulin Nation, the Buiwurrung and Buiwurrung language groups, and I would really encourage people to speak to each other online by saying which country you're coming from or you're representing today. So as Tal said, it's a complex and vexed issue that we're facing both within academia, but also outside academia in terms of skills and training. And interestingly, this whole notion of green skills and green skills for the future should really be about skills and skills for now, rather than green skills for the future. So nationally, as well as globally, there have been a lot of discussions on the type of skills, the sort of workforce that we need to help to transform to a sustainable economy. UNIDO actually calls this the knowledge, abilities, values, and attitudes needed to live in, develop, and support a sustainable and resource-efficient society. But different people use this term to mean different things. And interestingly, on the UNIDO website, there was reference made to SDG 12, which is on responsible consumption and production, and SDG 9 on infrastructure, but actually nothing around SDG 4 or SDG 8, SDG 4 on education, SDG 8 on economy, SDG 7 on energy, because we are talking about renewable energy as part of this transition to the workforce. So this is a big and complex topic, but we today would like to touch on two elements. What are the skills that are lacking, and what role can higher education, but not just higher education, what role can vocational education play in closing these gaps? So we've got several panelists with us today, both from within and outside the higher education sector. They have been thinking deeply about these issues as part of their work and are going to help guide us through the issues today and hopefully answer some of the questions, burning questions that you might have. So I'd like to now hand over to the panelists to briefly introduce themselves. And I'd like to hand over to Richard Evans, who is the CEO of Talent Nation. Over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Usha. I'm joining you from Whadjuk land. So I have just landed in Perth about an hour ago and scrambled to find a quiet place to join you. But normally I'd be dialing in from Boonwurrung land in Melbourne. It's great to be here. Very quick piece about why I'm on the panel. So I've been working in recruitment for 25 years, the last 16 focused on environment and sustainability. So I've seen it go through I guess the various cycles over that time. So my organisation, Talent Nation, has focused purely on that since 2012. And we've worked with over a third of the ASX 100 across Australia, as well as high profile not-for-profits and private entities. So we live and breathe this every day. And in terms of who we are as an organisation, we're a founding B Corp here in Australia. So our constitution is anchored to driving positive change and positive impact, and that aligns with our commitment to 1% for the planet and carbon neutrality. So great to be here today. I spend a lot of time talking about the skills gaps and certainly what's coming down the pipe for us. And so yeah, excited to be on the panel today with my colleagues.
Thanks, Richard. I'd like to now invite Grace van Egmond, who's the CEO of the Banksia Foundation, to please introduce herself.
Thanks, Usha. And thank you very much for allowing me to take part in this. This is a bit of a passion of mine. Education, have worked a bit with Monash University, Melbourne, Swinburne, in various capacities, but I think, Banksia has been acknowledging and recognising environmental excellence or sustainability excellence for 35 years. I've been at Banksia for 26 and have had the discussion around higher education and the need in the workplace, and what are the needs specifically, and what can be done about these, and how do we, I suppose, collaborate in developing the sorts of skills that we need for companies that really do need a bit of a push and a bit of a support too. It's especially the SMEs. It can be a lonely space. And there is a lot of need for SMEs, but I'm very keen to share some of my thoughts and the things that I have learned along the way in my 25 years at Banksia. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Grace. I'd like to now turn our attention to William, last but not the least. William van Ousdel, Head of Sustainability, Property, Facilities and Development at Flinders University, and fellow board member of ACS. Over to you, William.
Thank you, Usha. And it's great to be here. I'm coming from Ghana country in southern Adelaide. And before being in the university sector, and part of why I think I'm here today is I've worked across public and private sectors in government, environmental energy management, and public health in Australia, Aotearoa, and overseas. And at Flinders, we have a whole of institution approach. And why that's so essential in a state like South Australia, we're on track to be 100% renewable electricity in 2027, one of the fastest transitions to have happened on Earth. And we're reindustrializing sectors like green iron. And so it's all happening quickly, and institutions like ourselves and University of Adelaide have a huge role to play in that transition. And having worked in public health, I worked across thousands of nurses and clinicians. And so I've seen firsthand how you have to embed these types of skills across all sectors, whether it's finance, HR, engineering, all of them. And personally, I studied corporate environmental management in Finland. And why I bring that up is because their whole learning experience is built upon, from a very young age, interdisciplinary learning. So you choose what you're interested in and passionate about when you're 5 years old, all the way through being an adult. And before that, I studied a liberal arts degree where I combined things like sciences, politics, economics, sociology, communication. So these interrelated skills are so much needed when we're addressing these wicked problems. And most recently, Flinders University earlier this month hosted a SAG skills forum for identifying green skills. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but over 120 leaders in South Australia, industry, academia, government to address the green skills gap. So I'll try and bring their perspective to the conversation today.
That would be great. Thanks, William. So I suppose as a starting point, what would be really helpful is for us to get a better sense of what are the gaps that you're seeing in the skills and knowledge in the transition to a sustainable economy. So Richard, I might start with you and ask you, as the CEO of a recruitment agency specializing in sustainability, what are you seeing in terms of the changing demand for sustainability skills and jobs?
Great, thank you. I just want to make a quick point. So, William, that was great about the Finnish culture coming through. But being a Kiwi, I think you'd have a nation of All Blacks if it was what you wanted to do when you were 5 years old. So, maybe there's some work that needs to be done. So, I mentioned at the start, I've been in sustainability for 16 years, and we often talk about the evolution of the sustainability practitioner over that time, and certainly early doors, it was very much grassroots, community-led programs, volunteering, moves to trying to get waste paper bins or rubbish bins out from under people's desks, and almost employee-led was the next phase. Then moved into customer-led. We saw the introduction of the Modern Slavery Act here in Australia. But then the real acceleration over the last 4 years has been that drive from investors and almost the commercial element around sustainability. And now we're looking at that next phase, which is that compliance phase with mandatory disclosures and regulation really starting to lift the floor. We've had organisations pushing forward and really stretching themselves, and this compliance phase will drag the laggards up. So I guess for us, what we've seen is the need for sustainability practitioners to really build on their commercial acumen. To get things across the line, organisations need to build a business case for programs, whether it's working with not-for-profits where they need to look at their social impact or the return on investment for organisations that are investing in them. And as we look at that transition, what is the cost of transition? Matt Keane says it beautifully in terms of, he was the former treasurer for New South Wales. The cost of transition is expensive, but not as much as what it costs to deal with the bushfires and the floods and the impacts of climate change. And so this almost short-termism that we're faced with at the moment, it's inhibiting the investment. So we need to be looking at the skills to how do we actually build a strong business case to lay things out commercially. We can't just rely on the heart to drive things. From a demand side currently, the last 18 months has been all around data and analytics. there's lots of gaps in information, and we're at the start of the wave of people that can manage those disclosure requirements. We haven't seen the panic set in yet. We will, where organisations realise that they're probably 18 months, 2 years behind where they should be, and we'll see a surge and a need for those skills. So certainly for us as an organisation, we're looking at parallel sectors and how can we look to bring skills across. So that role of higher education, that is going to be critical, but it hasn't been mapped out yet, and maybe we'll talk to that in a little while in terms of what can be done.
Great, thanks, Richard. So lots of push and pulls in there, and lots of levers that could potentially be shifted. Graz, I'd like to come to you and perhaps get you to think a little bit more and obviously share with the audience. From your work at the Banksia Foundation and with the kinds of organizations and businesses that you have dealt with over the years, what have you observed around the sustainability skills that they need and or the skills that they lack?
Okay. All right, Usha. One of the things, and I've been thinking a bit about this, I think it's the connectivity between disciplines, joining the dots. Sometimes the old working in silos, I think, is something that I keep on hearing and seeing continually. And I think graduates understand environmental science or business or engineering or the various aspects, but rarely do they put it all together and bring it all together in the one format. And I think companies need people who can speak multiple languages these days and are fairly versatile across areas. They need to be technically savvy, financially savvy, and socially savvy. So it's those sort of areas integrating, especially if you have a look at the SDGs and how we relate to those. So I think it's across all these areas. I think making the money case too. I think, in this time of where there's cost of living and there's financial pressures, also, I think most graduates find it really hard to translate from doing good into good business. And I think that's something that we really need to be discussing and talking and as I said, in collaborating with businesses and industry to be able to present those scenarios to students. And I think companies need people who can build these compelling financial arguments for sustainability initiatives. You need to prove the case. You need to go out. You need to communicate why you're doing these. So I think it's really important to prove the case. And it's that making the change happen too. It's being around, theory doesn't equal practice necessarily. Graduates, I think, struggle, and I've had a lot of interns that I've had the pleasure of working with, but I find that graduates struggle somehow to implement ideas in the real world. And I think that exposure more to those practical elements, I think, would really, really help. And the old thing, navigating office politics, how to communicate, all those sorts of things that I know it's down to experience, but it wouldn't do any harm of trying to give those skills to the graduates before they enter into the arena and have to face, the various challenges and I think more skills that can provide for or graduates in the sustainability space will assist them in getting their messages across, whether they're in a bigger corporation or in an SME. But I think that's really important. And the old thing, the supply chain, really looking at the supply chain and what that means going forward. And not just the theoretical, but the practical skills, the understanding the design aspect. I get so many people sort of just replacing or recycling, but the whole circular economy and the supply chain that we're looking at has a whole different way of thinking. So I think it's also, how do you translate that into product, into design, into going forward? And then data. sustainability needs to be measured, as Richard was saying, the compliance, that's happening more and more and more, and there's more emphasis on that. But I think also, and I'm seeing a lot of people in the industry sort of saying, I don't want to do the compliance, I don't want to do the reporting, I want to do the creating, I want to create programs. So it's really, are we giving the graduates a false sense of security of what they're going into, and something that possibly they don't want to be doing and they're not sort of geared towards doing? So I think we really need to have a look at that model.
A whole package of issues in there. Hopefully we'll be able to navigate through some of them today. I can't promise that we'll have the answers to everything, but a good summary, Graz, I think, of what are some of the challenges that are out there. William, I'd like to now turn my attention and ask you. You mentioned at your introduction that South Australia hosted the South Australia Zero Green Skills Forum. So perhaps, using that as a starting point, you could tell us a little bit about the forum and what was identified as the key gaps, which I'm sure is not just a South Australian issue, but probably an Australian-wide issue and maybe even a global issue. Are you there, William? Because you're frozen on my screen.
Yeah, I think William's frozen.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we might actually, there's quite a few questions coming into the Q&A. William, I don't know if you can hear us or not. If you can hear us, maybe turn the camera off and speak. But if you can't hear us, maybe go back out and come back in again. I might pick up this question from Corey. How much of the professional accreditation organizations, including sustainability in their requirements, and how might they be encouraged to do more? Richard, would you like to give this a go?
Sure, I can jump into that. So look, that's a really good question, and I guess if I can talk to a couple of the organisations. So I know certainly for Chartered Accountants, so CPA Australia and Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand, they've been looking at how they integrate sustainability into their programs, and have certainly developed a suite of tools for their members, but also for other people to train. Because what we're with disclosures, and this is something that we've been working on for a while, is the analytical component. Organisations will want an ESG analyst. 3 years ago, they didn't exist. So what they're looking at is a financial analyst who has the strong modelling skills, Power BI, data manipulation and modelling, and then training them to shift across into non-financial data and analytics. So there's a blend happening there, and so they're trying to work out, is it more effective to take a sustainability practitioner and build those accounting skills, or take someone with an accounting accreditation and background and build sustainability? And there's no right or wrong answer at the moment. The main thing is that they need to make sure that there's support around that. If you look at Infrastructure Sustainability Council of Australia and Australian Sustainable Finance Institute, they're both building out capability frameworks at the moment for professionals within their sectors, and I know the Green Building Council does the same. They spend a lot of time around accreditation. So there's a lot being done, but I think it also links back into Graz's point earlier around everything's being done in a silo. So it's organisations are focusing on, okay, well, what do we need to do to provide to our members, but also how are we going to fund this? Because at the end of the day, they're an organisation, usually a not-for-profit. There's not access to a lot of capital. So how do they actually maximise their return to their members to keep them engaged? And some are engaging with some of the universities. So we certainly see that with some of the universities, they are engaging around that. And then others are trying to work out, do they do it themselves? But certainly we're seeing a lot more of those member-based organisations trying to upskill their members in this space.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard. I mean, I can't help but also comment that while the sustainability-based organizations like your green building councils and ISKs of this world are obviously, because that's their core responsibility, to pass on and to encourage the sustainability transition. At the same time, we cannot just have a professional development only approach to this. There has to be a core change made in universities to teach these core skills as part of graduate attributes. So sustainability needs to become a graduate attribute, regardless of whether that's nursing or accounting or buildings and construction or whatever else that might be. So Graz, I'm wondering from your perspective and with the sorts of organizations that you work with, is there any particular pearls of wisdom or any words of advice that you would like to share?
I think Richard covered off fairly well. It's becoming a much more complicated arena, and I think it's and there's no one overseeing it. Every association, everyone's putting out their accreditation and their everyone's putting out tools and creating tools for this and the other, and it's just I think driving everyone crazy. And I think there needs to be some sort of overview, and maybe this is the role of universities, that they take that on and work a little bit more, not just with one association or group, but with the total, and just sort of see how they can make it a little bit more simpler to navigate. And also to communicate what is out there, because a lot of people are lost. I mean, how many times can you sit on Google and try and find out what, what accreditations, what you need, what do you need to do? I mean, it's becoming, yeah, a myriad of confusion. But I think that could be a really good role for higher education, to take on that and just sort of, try and sort that out a little bit more.
Yeah, I think just to build on that, if I can. So one of the challenges is the space is moving so quickly at the moment, and so the pace of change in terms of what credentials, what you require, you overlay the geopolitical landscape and the anti-ESG movement happening, and so is that going to roll things back? What impact is that going to have? And then you have, using the US as an example, you've got individual states then doubling down on their commitments. So it's very hard to have a crystal ball and go, right, okay, this is what we need. And so therefore institutions are delaying their decision or delaying their investment, because at the end of the day, a university still needs to make a profit. They can't overinvest because they think this is going to happen, because we've seen that decisions can shift, legislation can change. So yeah, trying to work collaboratively to try and build something that if it does shift or it does change, then you're not investing in something that won't deliver value.
Yeah, great point, Richard. And I think that takes us really well to a question that has come through from Delvin. And she says, quality education is a critical goal. This is dealing with SDG goal 4. Schools struggle to take on more when they're time poor and have competing priorities. I believe higher education has a huge opportunity to teach the SDGs to pre-service teachers so they can take the goals into their respective schools once they graduate. I've tried to identify which universities do deliver SDGs to pre-service teachers. And the question is, how many universities prioritize teaching pre-service teachers about the SDGs? This might be very specific. So I'm not sure if either you, Richard, or you, Graz, are able to answer.
I have absolutely no idea, Asha.
I don't know. I mean, I know since one thing I can sort of say, I think the SDGs have not been, we're doing some market research with Glow, our market research company that we're working with, and it's frightening on how little knowledge there is about the SDGs in the Australian market, let alone in the education. I don't know about the educational institutions, but it is scary. And again, we bring in these models. How many models do we have? And who do we play with, and how do we play with them? you know, this is the other thing. This is the other thing that worries me. Is it just another new version of something else that's coming on board that is confusing people, and we are dissipating it rather than bringing people together? So everyone has a different term for everything, you know, for the same thing, and we're confusing people. So I think we somewhere along the line, and Richard, I think what you said was really, you know, like with what's happening in the US and in different, you know, jurisdictions, everyone's got a different view on everything else. And I think because there is so many different tools and so many different perspectives out there, we need to collaborate and bring that into some sort of structure and be able to present people with not a one size fits all, but we have to start looking at that a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, we'll come back to that, Graz, because I think you've really opened an important issue on the taxonomy of what do we mean. And I can't help but think about the confusion between sustainability and circular economy, and net zero, and you know everything associated with that. But William's back. Welcome back, William. And I'd like to now turn to you and ask you if you wouldn't mind answering the question about the South Australian Net Zero Summit. Thanks.
Thank you. And Graz, as you mentioned, geopolitics, I wonder if my computer crashed, maybe because I'm a US citizen. I don't know. It was the timing of that crash was suspect. Anyways, yeah, SA0 is a South Australian collaboration, and it's to accelerate zero carbon and zero waste, to your point, Usha. And core members include the likes of BHP, City of Adelaide, CSIRO, Flinders Port, and the 2 universities. But in this event, we invited literally the largest employers in the state. So resource sector, construction, engineering, utilities, tourism, banking, etc. And we started the event, and I'm doing my best to take 200 people's points of view in 6 hours of reflection into 2 minutes. So we'll see how I do. But we started with the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report. And it shows, of course, that automation and AI are transforming the workforce. And what people assume is that will mean fewer jobs, but the projections actually show, because of trends like climate adaptation and mitigation, it will be a net job creator, not loss, by 2030. And it dives into specific skills such as renewable energy engineers, sustainability specialists, EV system technicians. And again, those global trends that are top drivers reshaping the workforce are investing in reducing carbon emissions and adapting for climate change. And of course, these things are not going away. It's not a fringe issue, it's a mainstream economic shift, even in the context of the global geopolitics. And they're not just technical, like we were mentioning, it's systems, it's cross-disciplinary, and it's urgent. So through the workshops, we broke into numerous workshops, AI assisted, and the key skill gaps were around the themes of circular economy, energy management, and compliance, mandatory reporting. I did hear that from you, Richard. There was a general sense of panic in the room, which I don't even know if I can put words to. For SMEs,
it's comforting for me to know that there is some panic now, because it needs to happen.
Yes, for sure. From SMEs perspective, the need for micro reskilling pathways, especially short courses and micro credentials. So many of these smaller businesses, they just don't have the resources to hire a sustainability specific role. So they're looking to upskill generalists, whether it's accountants learning carbon accounting or operational person learning resource recovery principles. And then to Graz's point, these industry-based projects, real world cross-disciplinary projects that let students solve these problems. And large corporations are dealing with different issues more deeply, things like electrification, AI data centers, huge energy users, mining and regulatory compliance. And then the final point, and I'd say this was where a lot of the debate was around the vocational system alone won't meet the demand. So there's clear shortages in skilled trades like electricians, engineers, and technicians, but there's a gap in the people who can coordinate and lead these complex transitions. And I was termed like the manager of managers. So that's my 3-minute summary of the most complex conversation, but hopefully that gets us closer towards it.
Thanks, William, for trying to synthesize that as much as possible. Maybe I'll pick up a question that has come through the Q&A, and this is coming, and William, it might be directed at you to start with, and then we could as a panelist. Ratna Lubis asks, how can business schools in the ASEAN region integrate sustainability into their core curriculum and experiential learning to equip future leaders with the mindset and competencies needed to drive a just and inclusive transition towards a sustainable economy? Would you like to have a go first?
Yeah, well, I'll just reflect on, I guess, how Flinders is trying to address that issue across multiple different colleges. So it's clear it needs to be a core competency across every field. And this is very complex. Embedding sustainability has many different permutations depending on the skill. And so it's all nuanced, and it has to be mapped against the skills of that particular learning pathway. And so business would have its own, I mean, I went through an MBA where we did just that. And this was before sustainability was a common term. That's where I learned carbon accounting. That's where I learned accounting, period. And knowing those principles, to Graz's point, knowing how to speak different languages to different departments and different outcomes is crucial. Another way we're addressing it, and this is, and I think to Graz's point again, time poor industries, mid-career professionals, traditional degrees are not always the answer. And so we need more flexible modular training, micro-credentials. So at Flinders, we've launched new green skill micro-credentials in areas like renewable energy, environmental health, water management. And it's all around designed to fit to people's work schedules and targeting real capability gaps. And then the last one, which again, to Graz's point, it makes me the most excited because it's in essence the most real work integrated learning, and it's the most effective tool we have. So through industry advisory boards, we hear from industry where their gaps are, and then we co-design placements that align with their needs. So Flinders, we facilitated over 15,000 student placements with over 10,000 organizations last year. And that's everything from carbon audits to resource recovery planning. And what makes them most powerful beyond the learning transfer to the student is back to the industry. So that's where students bring their new skills and thinking to the workplace, and the businesses start to build the internal capability without the overhead of hiring a new full-time sustainability lead. So it's low risk and high impact.
Thanks, William.
Can I just jump in,
please.
Asha? Yeah, just quickly. So, so I was at Melbourne Business School last week. So they've got a sustainability for strategic advantage course as part of their program, and so it's great to see, it actually being a core part of the MBA. But one of the things that I was talking about in there was that often sustainability is seen as a standalone. So people want to be a sustainability manager and lose sight of the fact that if we're looking at sustainability, it's got to be socially, environmentally, but also economically viable. And often we lose sight of that, and it becomes a social cause and an environmental cause. And absolutely, but everything needs to be in balance. And we've got to remember that if it's a business school, then it needs to be business driven. And so it's not necessarily going, right, okay, well, we need to teach these sustainability credentials. It's there was talk around that systems thinking, but how do you integrate these practices? Because yes, there's a strong environmental outcome or social outcome, but from a commercial perspective, you're de-risking your assets, you're de-risking your businesses, and economically, it becomes a viable option. So it doesn't necessarily need to be siloed and targeted. It's broader business skills.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Richard. Graz, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just, especially around working with the interns that I have over the years, you know, and Richard, to your point, it's this wonderful passion that these young interns have, you know, socially, environmentally. They want to change the world. They want to do these things. And when you sit down with them and you talk about the practicalities, you know, and then we start looking at, as I said, with Banksia, with businesses that are winning the awards and you know, talking about the various industries they come from and how they operate, and you know, the question from the graduates or the students of why aren't they doing this, why aren't they doing that? It's that sort of that beautiful mindset, but it's not practical. And all of a sudden they come down with a thud and they're sort of saying, well, you know, they should be doing this, they have to be doing this. But again, the practicality of, can they be doing this, or how do they approach this in the longer term? Is it a short-term gain, a long-term gain? How do you influence this? I found that the students were then sort of getting a little bit worried, sort of saying, well, it's got to be this way or that way. It can't, you know, there can't be both. So I think that's sort of, it's either, I don't know if you know if I'm coming across, but in the sense of, it's got to be practical. It's got to be adaptive to business. And I think business has got to come in more and work with tertiary institutions a lot more about their situations. And it's different from you know, where we are today with business and where we were 10 years ago. It's a completely different ball game. So, and I don't think it's static. It's continually changing. Issues are evolving, and are we capturing all that for the students? And I think that's really important. So that practicality, I think, is so important for me.
Graz, I mean, you're using the word practicality, but I see that as an inherent box we shape ourselves into right from primary education. We deliberately teach about only linear thinking, and we deliberately put things into pigeonholes rather than thinking about application in the real world and problem solving in the real world, because the real world needs a range of different skill sets to solve the problem. So if we did that right from get-go at school, and there are some types of education programs that support that way of thinking, Montessori, for instance, and Steiner schools and things like that, that really encourages this moving away from the siloed approach of disciplines and thought ideas, so that, you know, when students come into the world of work, they're not just thinking about one solution or response to one problem, but they're actually looking at that holistically in the workplace and trying to solve problems holistically. And sustainability, more than anything, I think needs that inter and cross-disciplinary approach. We've got more questions, and I don't know how many more we're going to get, but let's do what we can. This one has come from Anna DRC, and she says, all speakers have mentioned having to talk across business functions. The sustainability role has not really found a good home, IMHO, whatever that means. Sometimes it sits in legal and risk, sometimes in HSC, sometimes in finance, sometimes in comms. And I think this is what we've just been talking about. What insights do you have or thoughts developed about where the sustainability role sits best? Where have you seen it to be most effective? Where are the sustainability managers most happy, do you think? Where would it sit in your ideal world? Who wants to have a crack at this first? Richard?
I think it's either Graz or me here, but yeah, look, this could fill the rest of the session very quickly. So I'm mindful that we have time. So in my honest opinion, Usha, it's all right, I speak millennial. Every organization has a different focus. Often we see it sitting in corporate affairs and, like Anna said, at health and safety. And it depends where the organization is on the journey. And there's also that counter effect. So it used to be, if it was in corporate affairs or marketing, are you greenwashing or it's spin? Other organizations that might sit within procurement. Graz has done a lot of work with Australia Post. It used to sit, environmental sustainability used to sit within there. We're seeing climate reporting move into the office of the CFO, so finance. So it's almost the case that where it sits depends on where the organisation is in the journey, but the key element is that there is a champion or a sponsor. And for me, certainly, it's the CEO. It's the role of the CEO. So where it's worked most effectively doesn't need to necessarily report into the CEO. If it's a CSO, absolutely, but you need to have that sponsorship and the mandate from the top to drive it. That's probably the key element. Where it sits beyond that is an organisational choice and what they need to push at that point in time.
I would love to see a new normal where we actually don't use the title sustainability. It's integrated into the organization. But Graz, you were going to say something, please.
Yeah, I think it depends on the organization, what it does, and where it should sit, because I've seen organizations maybe focus more on the consumer, the brand, the whole thing, and if it's integrated into marketing and communication, works beautifully. Whereas something like logistics or whatever might need to be more in procure. I mean, I really do think that there's no one size fits all here. It really depends on what the organization is all about and where it lends itself. And again, there's a bit of debate on where it should be, but yeah, just depends on what the organization, what the company does.
I think you're spot on, Graz. Oh, sorry, William.
Oh, I was just going to say, obviously anywhere is better than nowhere. And in the public sector, I'd say generally it's in that kind of facilities development area of building things, just because public sector builds a lot of things. But I will say that I have a dream that there's a rotating function, like annually you just literally move through every function of the organization. This is complete theory, but I feel like there might be some synergies that come up through just moving through the organization that way.
Yeah.
Just go straight into the CEO, William. Then you've got full coverage. But I was just going to say very quickly, if you look at an organisation like Qantas, they've got 4 heads of sustainability. 3 of them are focused on fuel, carbon, and climate. So that you can see where their 3 biggest risks are for the organisation, and so that's where they've got the emphasis at the moment, with the Chief Sustainability Officer reporting into the CEO.
And that's a really good point to make, Richard, about the focus or the strategic development of an organization is often where the risks are. So the role basically shapes that area of risk, and therefore that part of the organization gets a lot more credibility and focus. We've dealt with questions from Del and Corey, so apologies to Corey and Del, because I'm not going to ask the other questions that they have, but go to Roxelle, who has picked up the issue of pre-service teachers. And she says that I think we have a host of very experienced facilitators, teachers, supervisors for research, service leaders in tertiary education who may not be able to or may not be able to incorporate SDG knowledge and insights in various ways. What is being done to get leaders to coordinate or lead? Any thoughts from our panel members? So this is about getting somebody to corral the SDG thinking within an organization.
I might, again, just reflect on how we address it, and that is through governance, making sure that every part of the organization is represented in these conversations. So yes, we use the SDGs as a guiding framework of principles, but within that, and we just went through a survey ourselves. We asked 1,000 students which SDGs are most important to them, and the findings are fascinating. I mean, they're not always surprising. From the School of Public Health and Nursing, of course, health comes out as a top SDG in engineering climate action, but surprisingly, things like poverty come up very highly as well. So I think like aligning the value proposition, and this is kind of to Graz's point, where like in marketing and communications, like you want to align to your customers, in our case, it's students, what is most important to them, making it evidence-based, making sure that people that make decisions are aware of the evidence, and bringing them all together to kind of horse trade on what can be addressed with limited resources.
Richard or Graz, do you want to weigh in here? No?
Probably not my area of expertise, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
I think just adding one of the things that I found, and as I said, being in Banksia for what, 26 years now, but the transition from environmental to ESG to social, you know, that sort of incorporating that social aspect, I think the SDGs have done an incredible service in being able to show people that it's not just about climate change, or it's not just about biodiversity, it's about all these things, and they're all integrated with each other. And I think that interests people a lot more too, that there's nothing that it's standalone, that if I'm interested in for example, education, it relates to poverty, it relates to better jobs, better situations, an understanding of the world around us, all those sorts of things integrated. And I think for me, that was the excitement of the SDGs too, because it did show a much broader appeal and engage people. Because a lot of people said, oh, I'm not interested in climate change or da-da-da, but, you know, so I'm not full stop, I'm not interested. But once we started talking to them about the SDGs, oh, of course I'm interested. Yes, poverty or you know, as I said, all those other things interest me. And I think that's the beauty of where we are headed with sustainability. Not that it was boring when I started at Banksia, but it was very defined, and it was, this is it, you know, this is just this little sphere here that you're concentrating on. Now it affects everything we do in life. And I think that's the wonderful thing, that where we're headed. And it's wonderful and also complicated.
People were just chaining themselves to trees back then, weren't they, Graz?
Exactly.
Sustainability. Yeah.
Exactly.
And some people still think that is what sustainability is, and that's it. William, did you want to comment?
Oh, just that I'm still willing to chain myself to a tree.
We have a comment from Matt, which I'll skip. I might go to this question from Julie, and she says, I feel we're still in a very current state rather than future state thinking. Do you think there are any organizations that are genuinely setting themselves up to acknowledge and deal with the realities of climate impacts, emergencies? And if so, how are they structuring themselves, and what skills are they seeking? This might be for you, Richard.
I was going to give Graz a go to go first. I'm happy to go first, but unless you want to go first, Graz.
No. I'm interested in what you have to say, Richard.
No, you're gonna judge me now. No, great question, Julie. And it's a tricky one to answer, because very much we're in current state, and we see that, you know, it's the cost of living, it's the various challenges that we're facing at the moment, and then also with disclosures, as I mentioned, in the floor lifting, rather than organisations really pushing themselves. Greenwashing as well. We're seeing the unwinding of net zero commitments and targets, and so that future state has almost been stalled a little bit. Where we are seeing it is in that investment sphere. So you look at the large investors that are investing in infrastructure. So, you know, IFM or QIC or one of the other three-letter acronyms that seem to fill that space. So they are looking at a port, for example, and the impacts of climate change, because it's not a short-term investment. They're looking to hold this for 50 years, for 100 years. So they need to be factoring in the risk around that. We were seeing it with energy, but unfortunately there's been some media lately where, you know, organisations like BP are increasing their investment in fossil fuels, because it's that short-term investment piece. So it's what's that arbitrage of trying to capitalise on the market now rather than that future state. But we will circle round again, and there's, you know, we are in a period of noise at the moment, and I think it'll be a bit clunky for the next 12 months, but we will start to see organisations go, right, okay, we need to put these things in place, because the investors will be looking at going, if we're going to put our money into this, we need to make sure that it's still around. We don't want stranded assets. We need to make sure that we're not going to end up on the front page of the papers. So that's probably where we're seeing it, and where we need maybe a bit more leadership from government as well.
I'd also just comment that local government really is on the coalface for this, like climate risk assessments. They understand the significance of this from an asset infrastructure perspective. And then, of course, Richard, you're on point. Insurance companies, like, they know better than anyone the impact coming in. That information's not going to go away.
Yeah, there's a cost, to the point earlier. There's a business case for it. Organizations working on disaster resilience and responsiveness, for them, it's how do they manage the payout when there is a climate event.
Yeah. So I just want to, I've been given the signal to wrap up, but I just wanted to ask a question, and this is going completely off the cheat sheet here, but I really
Love it.
like the panelists the panelists' response to this. We're talking about the role of higher education in accelerating the region's transition to a sustainable economy and society. Whose responsibility is it? And I feel, because I'm part of the higher education sector, unreservedly and unashamedly, I would say higher education needs to lead by example. So it's our responsibility. But I'd love to hear from Graz, Richard, and William. William, you come from higher education, but you don't come from the academic stream. So it'll be very interesting to hear your responses. Do you want to go first, William?
Yeah, so education covers operations and academia, of course. So operational, we're small cities scattered across the country, and we are leading. Through the ACTS network, the amazing work that's coming through universities is absolutely leading the way for society. How many carbon neutral, 100% renewable universities are there? How many are going to achieve it by 2030, spending significant amount of resources to get there? And so the wake of that innovation then becomes available to the rest of society. We're willing to take larger risks just by the nature of our business, and we do. And so we are leading, I'd say.
Thank you. I'll have to get Graz and Richard to keep your responses very brief, please.
Yeah, look, I agree with William, and it is higher education, but I think one of the key things, it is also, it might be a little bit easier for higher education to do, as you said, what they are achieving. But I think it has to be also a big leadership sector has to be now pushed up onto industry, and where do they want to go and what do they need? Because you can't work in this again as a silo. You need the industry partners, and I know universities, and I've worked with universities on this, but I think that could be done in a much better way. Really working with industry, again on a more practical perspective, not designated roles. This is industry. This is what we expect you to do, but we're not really listening. This is your role, this is the role that you've taken. But I think industry could really challenge higher education a little bit more and provide them with some really interesting scenarios where they could go with. But it's got to be a collaboration.
Thank you.
So I've got 20 seconds to provide. So I never go down this path, but I am going to say government here, and it's always industry. So universities, higher education, they're organizations that need to make a profit, so they need to look after themselves, they need to look after the shareholders. Industry is focused on themselves as well. Australia's got an amazing track record of developing incredible research, development ideas, and then it being commercialized overseas. And so it's that support. So we need to be thinking about how do we capitalize on this transition and the economic impact of that. And as both William and Graz have said, it is that collaboration piece. And so we need to be thinking beyond what's my piece of the pie, but what does the pie look like if we actually collaborate? And then we start to slice it up, because as it is at the moment, we're all fighting over small chunks and missing the real opportunity there.
That was a long 20 seconds, Richard.
Sorry.
over to you. There are so many more, questions in the chat, but I'm sorry I haven't been able to respond to all of them, but I've really enjoyed this. So over to you.
Thank you so, so much, Usha, and our amazing panelists. This has been such a fascinating and wide-ranging discussion. I really feel bad to cut you short, but hopefully it will be something that we can continue talking in other forums. And in fact, we will be dealing with some of this a bit more in detail in the first session next week, which will actually look at how you integrate a lot of these concepts into the degrees and programs across different disciplines. So there's a lot of different elements to this puzzle, and this is just the first step. But really, I want to say a huge, huge thank you for sharing your knowledge, expertise, wisdom, and we hope to be speaking to you again. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Tal.
Thank you all. Bye.